So I'm going to introduce the three speakers, and of course, you know, they can embellish and deny the allegations as they please as we go through. And maybe just before I do that, just to say a little bit about the format. It'd be great if everyone who's on the session could have a pen and paper with them. The first part of the session, it'll be me asking questions to the three panelists, Chiara, Sami, and Jen. And then we'll do a second part of the session before we move into questions, where the panelists ask questions to the audience, and then we'll have a few minutes of silent time, contemplation time, and then we'll open it up to group dialogue, and we'll probably have 30 minutes for that. And if you, as Karen said, if you want to speak, you just raise your hand on the participant section, or you can, if you prefer, you could write your notes in the comments in the notes section, and I'll read that. And Karen will be looking out for your hands. And then we'll move into a final prayer. We'll leave some time for that, like 15 minutes at the end. And Jen is going to close us out with the prayer and the song. So that's the format. And of course, you know, everything is subject to emergence. So if anyone has other ideas, feel free to put them in the notes section and we'll incorporate them accordingly. So I'm going to introduce Chiara first, and this won't necessarily be the order of response, but it may be for the first one. So Chiara is an independent researcher, freelance curator from Florence, Italy. Her inquiry is around the evolution of the ecstatic cult in the West, particularly in ancient Greece and Rome, contributing to anthologies, psychedelic conferences, and festivals. She's the program curator of Boom Festival's cultural area called the Liminal Village. She's been doing that since 2002. She also helped set up and run the content, the first cultural area for the Fusion Festival in Germany. She's recently co-curated an anthology called Psychedelic Mysteries of the Feminine, which I highly recommend. There's some amazing essays in there, which investigate the intersection between the feminine principle and altered states of consciousness. She lives in Portugal, and she also DJs under the name DJ Clandestina, so you can find her on Spotify. Sami Awad is the founder and program director of Holy Land Trust. Sami is a longtime peace activist. His mom is from the Gaza Strip. He himself actually lives in Bethlehem right now. He was deeply influenced by his uncle's teachings, Mubarak Awad, a Palestinian activist who promoted nonviolent resistance to the occupation during the first Intifada. And he's in the sort of lineage of Gandhi and MLK and Jesus, in the sense that he's a peace activist from a nonviolent tradition. And both Sami and Chiara are dear friends of mine personally, and we spent a lot of time together through the Tamara community and Defend the Sacred Alliance. And then we have Jen, also a dear sister. She's a traditional healer from the Yupik tribe of Western Alaska. She lives and works on the traditional lands of the Kenaitze Athabascan in South Central Alaska and the Maluku of North Central Costa Rica. She's a land steward, a cultural activist, and a bridge from old ways to new, blending ancient and modern and providing healing and understanding. She also does Yupik rites of passage ceremonies, and really focuses on altered states of consciousness. So I'm really excited to have these three humans together in one space that I've known in different walks and different ways. And I know how deeply plant medicine and psychedelics and altered states have sort of played such an important role in their individual evolution and how they walk in the world, really. And also just want to honor that before we start, really honoring the plant ancestors and the more than human world that is both our inspiration and our muse on one hand, and on the other is really the reason we continue to do the work we do in solidarity with life. And I also want to take a moment to honor the ancestors of the panelists from their different walks of life and everyone on this call. All the human life that has gone into this current moment and our ability to be here right now, and also all the more than human life, the trees, the plants, the wind, the sun, the stars, the elements, the conspiracy of forces that have led us to this moment right here, right now. So yeah, shukran. So we're going to start with just a general question, really, around the role of psychedelics in this moment in history, not just the COVID moment, but this broader moment of being embedded in the Anthropocene, in the Kali Yuga, in the Dark Ages. And what role do these plants play for you personally and in your understanding of social change? And we will start with Chiara and go to Sami and Jen in that order, and then we can open it up after that.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you, Alnoor, for the intro. And yeah, I just wanted to say I work for the Boom team since 2010, not 2002, like you said. That would have been a really long time. So yeah, because of my background in festival culture, I have to say that I got to psychedelics through that door. And so for me, the recreational use of psychedelics has been fundamental because it has allowed me to have my first experiences. And so usually the recreational use ranks last when we are discussing right reasons to advance with legalization. And so I wanted to bring here this perspective that, you know, since we are in Kali Yuga, we are going through a phase of deep subversion of hierarchies and also getting outside of categories and reinventing our vision of reality. And so also to subvert these ranks, hierarchical ranks of what is the right use of psychedelics. And I deeply honor and respect the ceremonial use and the therapeutic use. And actually the recreational use has been a door to the other kinds of uses. And so I feel that in this current phase, it's really important to keep the recreational use part of our way of using psychedelics. And so with this, I mean festival context, club culture, but it can also be at home or in nature by ourselves or with our friends. All these different kinds of uses have their rightful space and reason to be in our way of using these substances. And the more we create a safe and conscious way to use them, even in a recreational setting, the more we reduce risks and potential harms, and yeah, the more we open many doors towards all their potential. And I mean, I guess here in this call, there's some people that have been to festivals and they know more or less what I'm talking about. And there's some people that have never been to festivals or clubs. And so I wanted just to say that very strong experiences can happen there, and they can be sacred and healing. You can meet God in the dance, in a sweaty dance floor, or if you're high enough, you can also meet your grandma on the way to the toilet, and she can tell you the reasons why she was angry with your father when she was still alive. So all these possibilities are actually possible. And as outlandish as it might sound, this is actually the way that millions of young people experience the sacred and healing on a weekly basis all over the world. And so I want to stand for them and for their way, the way that is closer to them, so that we continue to support the youth in this very difficult transition, also understanding their ways and supporting their ways.
Thank you, Chiara. Sami?
Yeah, thank you, Alnoor. And it is really a joy to be with you on this panel and with this amazing gathering here. Yeah, to jump to your question, Alnoor, I fully believe that what we are experiencing today is not different than what, of course, many of us know and we began to experience in the 60s and the 70s. And very much, I believe, connected to the medicine work as the research and the opening of research and the opening of a new consciousness on the effects of the medicine started to take shape in the 60s and 70s. systems that felt threatened, political systems, reacted. And in a sense, as we've seen this research emerge again, and we've seen the deep healing work and the deep therapeutic and the deep spiritual work of medicines, I would also say in an indirect way, forces that do not want to see the manifestation of this research and the creation of a new consciousness are reacting. And I know there are, of course, many other reasons for what is happening. But for me, there is a correlation with the opening of consciousness, awareness, and a deep intention to achieve peace. There are forces that react. And my personal experience is directly connected to the medicine work. As you said, Alnoor, I've been a peace activist all my life. The first nonviolent action I participated in, I was 12 years old. And so since that time, I haven't stopped in an area that is, as many, hopefully everybody knows, embedded in violence and conflict. I live in Palestine. I live in Bethlehem. And as Palestinians, we've lived under occupation and continue to live under Israeli military occupation. But as a peace activist, the issue of medicine work involved in peace work never connected for me. I was a nonviolent activist. I studied Gandhi and King, so there was that spiritual component in it of my engagement. But my engagement in peace work was always about achieving a political solution to the conflict, ending the occupation, establishing a Palestinian state, and living side by side to Israel, hopefully as good neighbors. An experience that I had that began to shift my life was a visit that I did on a retreat to the death camps of Auschwitz and Birkenau in Poland. Now, as a Palestinian, it's not easy to go to such places, like many people, but for us, we do disconnect from the Holocaust and what happened there. We are victims, and so we don't relate to the historic victimization of our victimizer. But in Auschwitz, what I experienced and I realized that a deep part of the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis is embedded in trauma, historic traumas that we have inherited from the Holocaust, from the Nakba, and how this trauma creates fear and how fear begins to be the motivation of how we relate to the other. And I began to see this globally. Most of our conflicts are embedded in fear. Racism is embedded in fear, if we agree or not, rightfully or not, but there's that fear component in it. And as I began to research trauma, fear, what are ways to heal trauma and fear, by coincidence, I was introduced to the medicine. And I personally experienced an amazing shift in my personal healing of the trauma that I have inherited also in my Palestinian narrative. How I engaged as resistance also from a place of fear and even hatred. Even nonviolence was motivated by hatred. And to cut my time, to give more time for others, what I began to realize in the deep healing understanding of the medicine and taking medicine, that this is a key component that has been missing in the resolution of political conflicts. And so for many of us, and I'll share more some of the organizations later, we have begun to engage in researching, but very soon to implement programs with medicine, bringing Palestinians and Israelis together for deep healing work. Because we believe future visions that are free from fear are the visions that will be embedded in real peace in this land and throughout the world.
Beautiful, Jen. And thank you for that, Sami.
Thank you. I just want to apologize. There's some utility work going on, and it's making my internet unstable. Well, it's a blessing to be here and to speak for the plants and to speak for my clan of Western Alaska. We're Yupik Nation, and we have the historical use of the Amanita muscaria in our bloodline, and it's such a timely experience at this point with the pandemic. So in 1918, we experienced colonization and the last pandemic, which killed about 85% of Alaska Natives. And so I'm the fourth generation that's come back to the use of psychedelics in community. So it's been just honoring my ancestors and my relatives. They had to go underground for 3 generations. And so it's a work in progress to bring healing to communities here in Alaska. There's still pressure of religious prosecution, and if people choose to talk about the old ways, they can still be discriminated against in small communities. So that's a continual place of healing historical trauma using psychedelics. But I was really blessed in my life to have a mom that supported my return to the old ways. And so she recognized my gifts and put me through rites of passage. So my first rite of passage at 13 with Amanita muscaria, I kind of carry that with me. And I was so excited about it that I started leading LSD vision quests with my friends in high school. And I was so excited that as soon as I could leave home, I journeyed down to Mexico and spent time learning about psilocybin work with the Mayan lineage. And on my way back north, I spent a year down there. I studied with the peyote medicine and have then brought those plants from the south up here to Alaska. So for about 33 years, I've been working with psychedelics in ceremony. My ceremonial plant was primarily peyote, but then about 10 years ago, I was the secretary for the Native American Church of North America, and we journeyed to Texas, and I found out peyote is endangered. And that really sat with me. It was heavy on my heart because it was the plant I used most in my ceremonial work. And there's pressure. There's about 10 million buttons a year harvested for the Native American Church of North America. And the huichol came from Mexico, and they also talked about the pressure on the Mexican peyote fields and with mining, Rio Tinto mining out of Canada. So I started about a 4-year initiation into using psilocybin as my primary psychedelic support for rites of passage that I do now with my partner. So it's interesting that more psychedelic, psychoactive plants have been found in North America, Central America, and South America than anywhere else in the world. And we've talked about this in our tribal gatherings, and we really believe it's our animistic and shamanic heritage that allows us to communicate with nature. And I'm sure you've all heard how the plants have told us, and maybe you've had that experience as well. But as migrations and great migrations have happened through generations, when we would find ourselves in new territory with especially here in Alaska with the receding ice, that the plants would tell us what to eat and how to thrive in our environment. So thank you for coming. Thank you for participating. If this panel interests you, you've probably worked with psychedelics, and the work that you've done for yourself and community is changing and has changed your life, I'm sure, and is changing community, and it's beautiful to participate. When I started this work at 13, I'd have just a few people, and then most of my work has been with 1 or 2 people, and it's just been in the last 5 years that there's been interest in having larger groups of 5 to 10 people. And so I'm seeing the change that psychedelics have brought, the interest and the support of traditional medicine, traditional healers, medicine people, shamans. So thank you. Because this really, psychedelics is all of our birthrights from all the directions, the people of the four directions. We all have a lineage of psychedelic use. So thank you for coming back to the truth and to remembering.
Beautiful, thank you, Jen. Yeah, just as there are rights of nature, there's also rights to nature, you know, and those cognitive freedoms are part of what's being taken away from us with criminalization of plant medicines. So, and we can just go open style for a bit before we open up to the broader group. But I'd love to hear various takes from all three of you on the idea of plants as other, because one of the big barriers we always hear from people as well, especially the New Age, where there's a lot of, you know, we can call it spiritual entitlement or sense of arrival. People will say, well, you know, I'm already so evolved, I'm already of such a frequency, why do I need to take something that's outside of me? And so I'd love to maybe hear some takes on that, whoever feels motivated. Talking stick is in the middle.
I love that question, Alnoor. Thank you for asking. And when I'm asked that question, I say it's about surrender and also that humility to ask a question to either a plant teacher or a molecule of that opens a portal to more and deeper understanding. And so it is I like to use the word a rite of passage too, because we just never know what's going to happen when we take the molecule, right? So we're going to have a peaceful journey or an intensity. And so again, it comes back to surrender and a willingness to look deeper.
Thank you, Jen. I would also like to reply to this question that is really a fundamental question. And I would like to bring the example of the ancient rites of Dionysus, which is what I've been researching as a way to explore what is our own European roots of use of techniques of altered state of consciousness. And what were our rituals? What was our own way of approaching these experiences and interpreting the experience itself, and then also its benefits and its risks? And so in a way, during a Dionysian ritual, so Dionysus is known as the god of wine from ancient Greece, and then was exported to Rome as Bacchus. So maybe some people are familiar with this name, others don't. But so it's maybe the main lineage of shamanic. It's an adaptation of ancient Neolithic shamanic techniques to the Greek culture. And so in these rituals that were really wild and extreme, with loud banging music and frenetic dances and use of different compounds, probably at the beginning more in the line of psychedelics like mushrooms and maybe seeds, maybe even Amanita muscaria or different barks and natural things. And only later wine came in with the cultivation of wine and the vinification process. And so in these rituals, how the experience of entering into an altered state was described as being possessed by Dionysus himself. So this othering was the core of the experience, and the going into this state of enthusiasmos as it was known in Greek, was seen as the experience of becoming Dionysus. And Dionysus was representing life energy. So it was like being possessed by this energy of life that makes everything alive, makes the plants alive, the animals, and in a way was like resonating with this energy, resonating with creation and understanding that we are creation. So this othering was a way of becoming nature and being vitalized by the power of nature. So it was an extremely positive, powerful experience, very rich. And even back then, they were aware that it was not happening to everyone that was in the right. So some people were more prone to this kind of being possession experience. And those that were, they were considered the true messengers of Dionysus. So I always found it fascinating how we dealt with it.
Yeah, and I'll share my personal experience in this. First, of course, I would say that I respect people who choose to or not to choose to engage in medicine work. This is something that we know that we should not push and come also ideological in saying this is the way, because we've heard many people say this is the way. And I think part of respecting the medicine and honoring the plant is to fully be humble and surrendering and taking it as a deep ritual of personal healing and transformation. For me, I would say I also fully honor and engage in the recreational aspects of it. But my focus and my work goes deeply into conflict resolution. And coming from, as I said, a history of being a peace activist, I studied peace. I have degrees in peacemaking. I've done the research. I started the organization in Bethlehem as a peace organization, teaching Gandhi and Martin Luther King. So I come from that mindset that for the longest time thought we had the answers. Come together, come in dialogue, come and discuss, come in nonviolent activism together, resist together. This is what will lead to peace. But what I've seen over the years is two things. First of all, as individuals, peace activists, even those who are our friends in the New Age movement and who claim what they claim, we are all traumatized. We all come from either personal or collective traumatizing experience that either we have suppressed, we have neglected, or we did a few therapy sessions and felt good about it and just ignored that reality. But that traumas that we have experienced personally or collectively become embedded in our subconscious, become our motivation in the decisions that we make. And again, most peace activists are making decisions from a place of fear of the other. I want to make peace with you because I'm afraid of you, or hatred, but I can't do anything about it. So I'll try to reach an agreement with you until I find out how and what to do with you in the future. And these are the peace activists. For me, the plant, the medicine, truly, I would say, and I say this on behalf of also many people who have done this as part of peace work, has transformed me, has deeply healed the wounds in me that motivated me for the longest time out of fear, and shifted me to become motivated out of love, out of compassion, out of care, out of a deeper understanding of justice than just achieving my revenge and retaliation for what they did to me and my people, out of a new connection to the land. Again, in political conflicts, land is possession, land is ownership, land is a commodity. Who has it and who has more of it and who has the resources in it is powerful. And again, this is a big part of negotiating peace. Who gets what piece of land? Again, ownership to man. Through the medicine and the connection, and again, we've seen this with Palestinians and Israelis, a shift happens where it begins to honor the land, to honor the plants, to honor the water, to understand that we belong to her, and to understand that if anything, it is about how we honorably and respectfully share what she gives us. Borders break down in sessions when people take medicine together. Deeper connections happen. And so for me, my personal journey and research shows that, again, with all the respect for traditional peace work, I would say there's a shift that happens using medicine work that puts you in a new consciousness of engagement that I personally would say would not have experienced in my deep subconscious healing work as I have done by engaging with the plant and with the medicine itself.
Thank you. And I've had very similar experiences with the left and in anarchist circles, especially where there's this very clear motivation around social justice work, but very few people have done the spiritual work. And it makes it very difficult to want to build. So we could agree on what the economic policies could be, but to agree on what the post-capitalist world would be from a more values-based or embodied perspective is very difficult, unless people are willing to engage with their subconscious and their unconscious and the shadow aspects of themselves. And so I want to open up this other side of it, and we can be really free-flowing in this because so much has been brought up and it's such a huge territory. So we could go into the social justice aspect of it, or the shadow work aspect of it, but also what I wanted to presence was this idea of co-optation, because I'm thinking a lot about what are the barriers that people say, and especially activists, there's this feeling of I don't want to engage in someone else's rituals, in someone else's ceremony, someone else's traditions. And of course, this is also rooted in a form of respect, which I think is the beautiful aspect of it. And then there's also a shadow aspect to it as well, which is, people who are disconnected from their ancestors either take on other people's traditions more dogmatically, or the level of political correctness is so fierce that they won't embrace the medicine. And there's also been a question in the box around what medicines are we talking about when you say these experiences. So maybe we could just do one more round, and I'd love to hear Jen's perspective on this, especially as someone who comes from an indigenous lineage. And yeah, just one of the big barriers for activists is this fear of co-optation. What's your sense, and what traditions and medicines are you working with? What knowledge do you have to share on that? And then we'll go through the other two one more time before we open it up.
All right, so one of the barriers in my culture up here in Alaska, we have a lot of water protectors and land protectors that are currently fighting for, there's Pebble Mine, there's pollution in the Arctic Ocean that has been gathering there because of this Arctic gyre of pulling toxins from the world's oceans, and they come up here and they sink in the Arctic Ocean. And so we've seen an increase in cancer in the last 50 years, and we know exactly where it's coming from. It's coming from the mammals that we eat, the ocean mammals, walrus, seal, fish. And so, so it's so interesting. Like I said, it's been only 3 generations since this colonization happened in Alaska. And so the mentality that even I'm just getting more clarity on is what was taught to me, which is attack and defend. The sacred is secret, and if there's this fighting that goes on even amongst Alaska Native advocates, it's fighting over money, it's fighting this, it's this battle. And so I've, in my own healing, in my own process of understanding, is shifting. And so I'm bringing it into myself first, and then shifting into this, what I'm calling, universal law, and teaching personal responsibility of reactions, of any reaction outside of neutral. And so this understanding has come through my psychedelics, absolutely, because I do these ceremonies for myself and my community a couple of times a month. And so it's supporting people in these old paradigms and templates of keeping the sacred secret and attacking or defending. My defenses were so strong. I had been taught to defend myself, that my shield, this spiritual shield of mine, was nothing could get in or out. And so my work was limited. And so breaking down my own barriers to speaking truth and sharing the sacred.
Thanks, Jen. I assume your video is also down, but I think you said there's internet issues on your side.
Yes.
Beautiful. Were you going to say anything else?
Nope, that's it.
No. Thanks, Jen. Sami, Chiara, do you want to respond to that?
I would like to share a personal experience during a ceremony. I was here in Portugal in an ayahuasca ceremony. And at some point, I was outdoor. The ceremony was happening outdoor around the fire. And at some point, I started really doubting everything and questioning everything. What am I doing here? Why am I using a brew that comes from the other side of the world, from a jungle that doesn't have anything to do with this forest here in Portugal? What is our right of using a tradition that doesn't have anything to do with our tradition, our European lineages? And really going really deep into like, why are we here? Why am I doing this? And getting to this point, but then the answer came. And the answer was, I'm sorry, I'm gonna swear here, but this is what she said, or what I heard in that moment. What I heard was, you guys are fucked. You have stopped using your plants for so long that you have accumulated so much multi-generational trauma unprocessed that you reached a level that you need an emergency solution, which is coming from the other side of the planet. After all, it's the same planet where you come from, in the same galaxy, in the same corner of the universe. So this is something that is coming to you and that you need to use because you reached a point of emergency and urgency. And it was so clear and so simple that in my case, this completely eradicated the doubt from my head. I'm aware that there can be other nuances of the right use, the reciprocity, how also not to abuse certain substances, like Jen was mentioning peyote. So we really need to be careful and conscious and reciprocal about the way we engage with these foreign traditions. But at the bottom line for me is that I agree with this answer that we are in a very special situation, an emergency situation, and we need to be open to any way of healing our traumas in order to transcend to the next phase.
Yeah, beautiful. And I'll just build on what Chiara and Jen said. For me, I also believe that the medicine is part of nature and is part of the globe and part of the world and was created with and for all of us. And I think the question that you ask, and when these questions come up, they come because something happened. You know, if we honor the medicine from the beginning and then really engaged in it in a way that respected and humbled ourselves to it, questions like this wouldn't be asked. But the moment we began to see the abuse, the moment that we began to see the manipulation, the addiction, the escapism, the wrongful use of the medicines, then a few of us began to ask, well, was it right to even start with this? So the question shouldn't be, was it right? Not this, how have we been dealing with this? And for me, I say, yeah, it almost like shakes me to say this. The medicine is there to save us. As Chiara said, it's there for all of us. We've really messed up. as humans and continue to do the same. And for us, when we talk about the medicine, the research that's taking place now is with the ayahuasca, and then we're creating it again, not just as an experience. We're creating it as a process that people engage in through entering the space, through integrating, through really being in ceremony for the time that they are in this space, and so. Of course, we have seen the abuse. We have seen it even in ceremonies. I know, sadly, some activists who went through the phase where their role was just to jump from one ceremony to the next one. When is the next one? When is the next one? And to go to that one and claim it is about their personal healing and claim that it's about vision work, but nothing happens between. So the integration, the engagement, the actions that become a key component of this work. And so this is where we are at. And we work also, like, just to mention that this research is being led by, many of you know, MAPS and Empirical College. They're leading this research that we are engaging in, and we're looking forward to the results of this.
On a session we had yesterday with a dear elder and brother that many of us know on this call, Tiokasin Ghost Horse, he said, you want to take our culture, but not take on our suffering. And I thought that was such an interesting thought, because, you know, I think, yeah, on one level it's true. Ayahuasca is beyond the Amazon, for example. You know, ayahuasca is our sort of global endowment as a civilization, and yet it has been stewarded and protected by the tribes of the Amazon for you know, hundreds, probably thousands of years. And so it's the manner by which we approach, you know, and how are we in reverence to those cultures, but also how are we in solidarity to those cultures. And Atosa Soltani from Amazon Watch says this often in ayahuasca circles and ayahuasca space, that you're getting this great benefit from this plant, but if you're not in solidarity with what's happening in the Amazon and with the indigenous communities there, then you're only doing half the work. And I think that's also just a beautiful reminder. Of course, these are our collective endowments, but endowments come with responsibility. So as I said at the beginning of the session, that we were going to do 3 phases. We were going to do the sharing, which we just did. We're going to go into the questions from the panel to the audience for contemplation. And then we'll go into dialogue before closing with prayer. And there's already questions starting. And the reason I want to do this, and we also did this in a session yesterday, is rather than just being in the reactive mode to what has been said, is to just go into a moment of contemplation. These questions don't necessarily need to be answered in a linear way. You can even just write them down and sit with them. But I love the panelists to offer some areas of inquiry that maybe you're engaged in that we could share with the group, and then we'll have just a few minutes of silence before we open up to questions. Maybe we'll start with you, Jen, and then you're on mute.
Okay, so I come to this work mostly from a ceremonial aspect. So my question is because I just wanted us to be inspired by each other. And so I ask people to have an intention to use the plant medicine. And again, this is for ceremonial use or even for recreational use, right? That celebration or deep intention. So what are some of the most recent intentions for the psychedelic journeys that this group has been working with, and that will inspire all of us? Thank you.
I can put my question in. Is just in this moment with the race protests happening in the US and globally, and we're at sort of this moment of peak hubris, peak racism, peak capitalism, some would argue peak humanity, but I think it depends on which humans we're talking about. How do we transition from this moment of like individual healing and coming to ceremony for my own healing to really holding a vision and a prayer for a broader post-capitalist vision? And how do we do ceremony work and medicine work with that intention, which is, really a form of collective magic? So moving from the individual trauma and healing to the collective magic. Not to say there's an either or. There's a time and place and context for everything, but I just put that question to the audience. And I think, Sami, you were going to say something.
Yeah, not sure, or not knowing if people have done or not done medicine in this circle. My question is more related to conflict. I just want you to think of your identity group, whether you like it or not, that you either label yourself or others have labeled you. Could be political, gender, social, economic, racial, ethnic. And just to reflect on the question of what is the deep-rooted fear that exists in your identity group that is creating conflict with others. What is behind the conflict? Many of us just want to engage in the conflict itself, try to resolve it. But if you could just reflect and think of a one particular fear or a trauma point in my identity's history that has led to the current conflicts that I am in.
So my question was almost like the one of Sami. I think it goes in that direction, more or less. And it has to deal with the fact that these ritual spaces, and can also be this kind of like festival dance floor spaces, they put people in a space where we experience a non-dual reality, where we are both male and female, and we're both wild and human, and animal and human, and wild and civilized, and sane and insane. So we experience this liminality, and we transcend these categories, and we transcend the dual world. But it's really, now where we are culturally, we have to really make a leap to get to that point. So my question was about that leap. What does it take to make that leap, to jump into the unknown where we don't have any more references of what it means to be a woman with almost like possessed by male energy, or the other way around, or an animalistic instinct coming in? Like this leap of leaving our identity behind and venturing into the unknown of a new way of perceiving reality. Is there a fear of making that leap, and what that fear can be about?
Thank you. So we're going to hold just a few minutes of silence before we get into questions and dialogue. And so, yeah, I'm just going to press mute. And I know it's hard to look at a Zoom screen with 100 people and be in silence. And that'll be the part of the liminal experiment. Mm. We'll start with the Bismillah, as the plants remind us. In the name of Allah is in the name of all creation, which we are co-evolving with. And there's a few questions on the chat box, and we're going to also just open up to hands. So you feel free to respond to the questions, to ask questions, and we'll do a mix between questions in the chat box and hands. And I think Karen's going to unmute people one at a time.
Yep. John, I'm going to unmute you.
And you can direct your question, John, to who you want, or to everyone.
Yeah, great. Thank you. First of all, thank you all for the deep journeys you've done ceremonially, celestially and terrestrially, and bringing back the treasures to share with all of us. You know, I was hearing, whether it's in peace building or these quantum leaps we need to make in consciousness, I think my question is, you know, we seem to be sort of bound by form, or maybe even words, and these realms that I've traveled in through psychedelics and plant medicine seem not to fit squarely into this world. They have different laws of physics, different, you know, they're beyond words and form even, and energies. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are if we just take it from what's happening in this world right now with racial injustice coming to form, and that seems like an issue. I mean, it's a many nuanced issue, but an issue of form, of color, of skin, of something that's in the material realm. And it seems that I often ask myself, one of the things I'm contemplating is, what are we fighting for? You know, are we fighting for that there is difference between us, or are we fighting for that there's oneness? And I'm wondering, in both peace building and in taking this new leap, how to become formless. You know, how to be immortal wine in mortal wineskins, more or less. So you can take the analogies and metaphors and just see what speaks to you. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I'll start. I'll try to be brief. And I just want to add more to the question that you asked. In addition to what you shared, one question that we ask is how do you engage in this work in continuous conflict? A lot of work in the past with medicine work has happened in the on a personal level with PTSD, for example. So it's the post trauma. What if the trauma continues? What if the violence continues? Then what is the role of the medicine? What does the medicine do in that space, knowing that I'll probably be in a session today and get arrested tomorrow, or be in a session today and be stopped at a checkpoint and detained for hours in a few days? And then, so this has been a big part of what we have engaged in research. And what I would say, on one level, there is what happens in the ceremony itself. And I think a lot of what you shared is the experience of what happens with the medicine itself. And that is a different realm. That is a different realm of consciousness that we're not continuously connected with, and we have to go back to reality. But what we have seen is that shift in people when they enter back into reality, that something really changes in them, in their behavior, in how they see the other, how they relate to the other, and especially when they are together. One of the sort of common joke lines that we have in some of the sessions is people coming out saying, everybody was purging for me. You know, like we're all purging together. We're all in this consciousness together. We're all in this brain together, and we're aware of it. So the possibility of us being together and honoring each other and crying together and healing together is there. And so what we see then is the shift that begins to take place after this. And this is why we are calling it a research. Again, we're not saying this is it and this is the truth. This is a research that is new and is ongoing. But the main things that we have seen that come after this is the understanding and the acceptance of the other and their narrative. Instead of arguing and fighting their narratives, now there is an acceptance of the narrative, the erasement of the identity. Now, doesn't mean that the identity doesn't stay. We've had people come out of sessions where they actually felt more embedded in their faith and belief systems than any time before. A Jew feeling fully understanding their Judaism from a spiritual point of view, and the same with a Muslim as well. So there is the erasement of the identity that creates conflict with the other, but a deep honoring of the personal identity and seeing the spiritual components of who they are, seeing the indigenous component of who they are, seeing the traditional ancestral connection to the land of who their identity is. And so this is the second point that I mentioned earlier, connecting to the land differently. We've seen this. Trauma healing, we've seen this. Even to use another word that maybe we shouldn't use, one reported in terms of the continuous trauma is that every once in a while we need to bring a shovel and just take some of the shit piles out of our brains so that we could continue. And we know the shit will come again, but to clean it every once in a while really helps us engage in this peace work. And the last point is we've seen the transformation of activism. I mentioned my personal experience, but we've seen this with others where activism shifted, a more compassionate, more caring, more loving, and more intentional activism we have seen emerge. I want to say all of this not to amplify what's happening, but just to give signs that there are really hopeful signs in this work that's taking place, and thankfully for the medicine.
Chiara, Jen, do you want to add anything, or?
I would like to add something because first of all, thank you, Sami. It's really good to connect to those truths that you found out through this work. I wanted to connect to a part of the question of John where he was talking about what kind of reality do psychedelics inspire us to perceive. Is it a reality where we're all one, or is it a reality where we're all different? Well, my perspective is that is a reality where both realities are true. This is the paradoxical reality. And this concept of paradox is really something that is helping me in my experiences with psychedelics to understand the psychedelic reality, and to be surprised also to see how even as complex it might sound, it can also be simple. Everybody's the same and everybody's different at some level. And really a psychedelic experience can help you make those connections in your brain to get to this point. And we are different from the plants and the animals, but we are also the same with them. So to really train ourselves to stretch our perception, to embody all these differences and their oneness at the same time. And yeah, and at the same time, also in terms of identity politics, I think psychedelics really re-educate us to appreciate the weirdness of creation, because in a way patriarchy has formatted our perception to see everything in these categories, and the categories even have hierarchical structures where one is better than the other. And actually a psychedelic reality is a reality where things can really be paradoxically weird. And so to embrace even, for example, a man that dress like a woman but can still like women, and to really enjoy and be in awe in front of creation in all its variety. So just yeah, I believe it's these plants and substances, they inspire us to regain the awe towards the weirdness of creation and the sacredness of the weirdness of creation.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful, thank you. And I would add to the work of having that be an intention to go in and explore this separateness and the oneness in your next journey that you do, right? So have that personal experience of exploration. I've had some experiences in the last few months of really anchoring my understanding that I am not separate from the plants and the elements, and that shared consciousness that I can connect to. So I really do recommend a personal inquiry.
And beautiful question, John. And the thing I would add is, I feel like what's happening in this moment right now, the end of late stage capitalism, the COVID moment, all of it is, we are being initiated into non-dualistic thought, into being able to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously. And so, yes, we are all fractal manifestations of unity consciousness and the oneness. And simultaneously, there is difference. And the difference and the diversity is where the beauty of that fractal reality lies. And that's why I brought up Theo Kassan's quote of, we want to take on these cultures, but not take on their suffering. And we have these very individualized and group and community level and race level and gender level, all these and realities. And so the sort of bridge between these two worlds is empathy and solidarity. And this is the issue with identity politics, right? The whole practice of psychedelics, of most mystical traditions, of many indigenous traditions, is to transcend the subject-object duality, the idea of the other. And at the same time, we have incarnated into a third dimension in the material realm on Gaia in 2020, living these very different bodies with this different sort of historicisms. And we also have to acknowledge that, because the only way we create that better world is by being in that deep empathy and solidarity and understanding the different histories and cultural contexts that led to this moment in order for something else to be born. And I feel like the psychedelics are our initiation into that. They're part of that initiation, because they're teaching us non-dualism in a very embodied way. And I don't know many other paths to do that. Definitely none is effective and none is quick as the psychedelic experience, held in container, held in ceremony, held in tradition. I know there's a couple of hands up, but I also want to just present a question from early on in the thread from Audrey Gidman. And she asks, really hoping to hear some wisdom in regards to the relationship, line, nuances between ceremony and addiction recovery, and or ways of having these conversations that include the reality of lineage, addiction, substance abuse. So I don't know if anyone wants to start. Maybe Jen, I feel like you'd have an interesting line on this.
Yes, that's a complex question, of course, and I think many providers of plant medicine would have different answers, right? It's not something that's easy to answer at all, and so, or quick at all. So I can just speak from my own experience and just that personal relationship that I build with every individual that reaches out and asks for support and encouragement on their own personal path. There's a lot of resources. There's so many online resources and places to go. And so it's about finding a provider and support locally if possible, or reaching out and making connections and building community for those, for that answer on an individual level.
And Jen, do you think it's possible you can be re-addicted to, you know, to transfer, I guess, in some ways from whatever you're addicted to the psychedelic experience?
Yeah, I've seen that in some of my experiences out there. I've seen people even using cannabis, right? So that is an example of something that can be addictive, and people shift. Some of the other more potent psychedelics are it's the initiation and the work is so intense that it's not a pleasant experience, and is not something that I've seen people become addicted to. So we're talking iboga, you know, even ayahuasca for me is a very difficult rite of passage. High dose psilocybin, it's very stressing on body and mind, and it takes time for integration of these experiences. I think human nature is, you know, that depending on historical trauma, and we have this tendency to seek experiences from an addictive place, but again, that's individual. I don't know. I haven't. I haven't read too much research on that.
Yeah, I wish I could get addicted to ayahuasca, but it feels very unlikely. Yeah. So, and there's a related question which came from Justin EO, which is, can you talk about the connection between the psychedelic experience and psychosis? So maybe Chiara, this would be a good one for you. Put you on the spot.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if I can answer this question properly, because it sounds like more like a question to a specialist in mental health. I can say again, in the ancient rituals, this being possessed by Dionysus could also go really wrong. And Dionysus is also embodying the destructive energy, a bit like Shiva, that actually the two gods are really parallel to each other. The two lineages, the two traditions, they are two manifestations of the same archetype. And yeah, there is this destructive power as well. But this is again in this mythological archetypical dimension. Then in the mental health space, I prefer not to indulge in an answer.
And just going back to the questions in the chat box, and if I miss one of the questions that are in the chat box, feel free to just repost it. But there was a question around from Sophie Howe around speaking to the role of daily practice, the work between the works, and how we practice reciprocity with plant teachers. So I'll leave that open to Sami, Chiara, and Jen.
Okay, so I'll speak to that a little bit. So the daily work that has been so potent in my life right now is really focusing on awareness. Where am I at? Am I in the past or the future? And so holding awareness in the present. And from this place, I call awareness our superpower. Then, so I'm more able to identify when I'm in a reaction, when I'm out of neutral. Anything out of neutral, then I'm aware of it, and I move my awareness to my heart, and I breathe through my heart. And from this place of my heart, I can shift perspectives. I can look at the reaction and a trigger from different places. And then, and that brings me back into neutral. I can look back out at the reaction or the trigger and see if I'm still triggered, and then go back to my breath. And so this is a daily practice. I've been practicing for about a year. This has come through plant medicine work that I've been doing with my partner, and it's changed my life. So again, I've been doing this work 33 years, and I have never stopped growing and evolving and changing and transforming. And it's beautiful work. And at this point, this is my most potent daily practice.
I just wanted to share also a practice that I have. Thank you for the question, because I think the work between the works is really often overlooked, and it should require as much attention as the work in the work to really be able to savor the fruits of the hard work that one does in ceremony or on the dance floor. So my practice, because before every ceremony, I ask a question, I have an intention, I have a main line of investigation. So after the ceremony, when I think I have more or less the answer that I received from that experience, I write it on a piece of paper. And it's the same piece of paper that I use for all the ceremonies. And then I fold it and I put it under a stone in my altar. And every now and then I go there and I read all the messages that I've been receiving in the ceremonies. And it's amazing how every time reading those messages, they become new. They give new meaning to what I'm living in that moment. They add new perspectives of what is happening to me. So I found this spontaneous practice that I've been doing very useful.
Yeah, and very quickly, I would add and say very similar to what Jennifer shared. For me, the daily practice is meditation. And this is something that I've been practicing for way before the medicine and will continue. And so the centeredness, the mindfulness, the meditation work is very important. And for me, there's like a mantra that when it comes to the medicine, in addition to what was shared with the intention, is the mantra is, we have been called by the medicine, not called to the medicine. And I think this is where it helps me to understand that I am in service. I have a bigger intention in my life than just to take the medicine. My intention is to serve. My intention is to create spaces for peace. My intention is to create spaces for healing, if it's between humans or with Mother Earth. And my daily life is committed to this, with or without. The medicine has called me and has helped me and has supported me, but never with the intention to put all my energy and my focus on the medicine itself. And so, like with everything else, to understand your higher self, your higher purpose in life, and then to see if and when and which medicine is calling you to help you achieve this through prayer and through a ceremony.
How do we acknowledge plants that have been imported, dried, and frozen, have gone through a death process, and suffered in this colonial capitalist system?
You just thank them. Open up your heart, connect through your breath, and honor the plants that you hold in your hand or the cup, or however it is that you're being offered this plant medicine. And again, it's that humility of talking to these plants or molecules as another aspect of self or consciousness, right? So if you met another human being, you would introduce yourself and have a conversation. So extend that to the plants that come from around the world to support you in your community.
I'm going to just try to summarize some of these questions and put them together, because there was a question around microdosing, a question around LSD, a question on first plant first medicine experience. And you know, the thing I would say is I was very, you know, I work in a largely in a Shipibo Peruvian ayahuasca tradition. And my ancestors worked with Syrian rue, which is an ayahuasca analog. And so it was a very natural entry point for me. And I felt a lot of familiarity and DNA remembering as I went into that space. And I was also very dogmatic about it for a long time. And I thought that, you know, MDMA and LSD and the sort of molecules were other. And then I started having dreams about them and having experiences with them. And, you know, I realized that it's all spirit. And what really matters is to, you know, first of all, establish a relationship, I would say, with a teacher plant. And for me, that plant is ayahuasca. You know, I've said this to Jen a few times, you know, I work for ayahuasca, but I go to battle with San Pedro and with LSD and with other plant allies. And there is a role for microdosing. For me, that's not with ayahuasca. I feel like plants like ayahuasca and iboga require flood doses to have that initial relationship with. But I do microdose with San Pedro and with psilocybin and occasionally with LSD and other plants, and I find that really useful. But it goes back to Jen's point, which is really being in that animistic dialogue and discourse, and realizing that there is no such thing as a non-animistic reality. We are in constant dialogue with the living planet, with the plants, with the molecules, and really approaching it from that place of humility. And Kristen made a beautiful point as well in the chat box, saying there's an important distinction between holding intention for ceremony, being humble and open, and seeking for an answer, which reinforces extraction. So not going into that space saying, what can I gain from this? But also, how do I contribute to the morphogenetic field of this plant, of this consciousness? Yeah, and maybe that's the transition moment as we hold a prayer for what morphogenetic field we want to create, especially in this very chaotic moment of late stage capitalism and the violence that's happening all around the world right now, and continues to happen, and it has been happening for 5,000-year history of patriarchy and capitalism and monotheism. So maybe Jen, I don't know if your video is working well enough to put it on, but we'd love to see you if you could, and if not, we'll listen.
It looks like Jen might have been dropped off the call.
Ah, okay. Okay, maybe I'll ask Sami if you would want to do a closing prayer for us. And if Jen comes back, then we'll have a second. And if not, we can close with you, Sami.
Yeah, so I just want to invite us to be present in this moment, to be present to what we have taken in, what we have felt, to be present to our reactions, to be present to our opinions, to honor them, whatever they are. As we take a deep breath, I want to say I'm thankful. I'm thankful for Earth, and I'm thankful for what she has provided us. I'm thankful that she continues to forgive us and to honor us with abundance, with all that we have done, to her, to all other creation, and to each other. And I pray for the healing of our species, for healing from greed, control, power, domination of each other and of her. The vision of this beautiful connection is something that we all carry. The vision of oneness in our diversity is something we all cherish. The vision of ending racism, sexism, and violence is something we all believe in. And may we, as we are called to engage in the healing of this earth and the healing of humanity, do this in humbleness, in deep gratitude, and deep surrendering to the spirits and to her and what she asks us. I am thankful for every person here and for the journey that you have been called to. Ah.